I could one day live in a world where I have no friends, but every year.
You don't live there now.
We welcome you to TWI Interviews. I'm your host, Ike, along with David Big D3 Youngs. We have a special interview today with Hall of Fame member of the USTA Northern Section, Bruce Gullikson. Bruce, how you doing today?
Doing great, Ike. How are you?
Doing good. It's a pleasure having a legend on the show. Bruce, you, me, and David got invited to a party tonight. Yeah. Do you remember where that party's at?
I think it's at the net.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
I do want to ask a challenging question to follow that up, though. So, parties at the net. I remember getting that message from you, from a birthday message.
Yeah.
But my favorite player outside the Americans is Rafa Nadal.
Sure.
Also, Novak Djokovic just won his 22nd major. Both these guys are baseline guys, baseline grinders. Do you think that party at the net might fade off into the distance eventually, or no?
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because they're a little misleading because obviously they're two of the greatest ground strokers of all time, but they dominate in 0 to 4 shot rallies. So, if you actually want to beat either one of those guys, you probably do want to party at the net because Djokovic, I just saw the stats, he won 56% of his ground stroke points in the Australian Open. So only 16 out of the 128 players in the draw broke even on their ground stroke points. So it's really the difference. So it's not that you have to go to the net on every point, but to take advantage of a short ball. And Djokovic, he's got lots of great things to copy. His posture is perfect. He stands closer to the baseline. He hits on the rise and he hits the ball really deep. So it's hard to get to the net against him. Although, it would be nice to see him against a young Pete Sampras at their prime on a hard court, because I think Novak would have a hard time breaking serve because he hits every return down the middle. And, it's prime for a serve and volley guy because nobody wants to come in against him. Novak hits the return deep at the feet, gets a short ball, and then he just jerks him around, So, basically, if you're going to stay back against Novak, you might as well just hand him the trophy right there, And by the way, his winning percentage at the net is much higher than his winning percentage at the baseline. Just obviously you can't go in as much, but it's still, that's where the difference, as the Spanish guys would say, if you take a match and there's 100 points, you get 45, I get 45. It's what happens those other 10 points, which is usually when you go into the net. So sometimes I think people understand, but and if you watch, I just watched the UTR tournament yesterday, and the frightening thing for most people is just anticipating when the ball is going to be short. So they don't really understand their opportunities to come in, because with the advent of a lot of topspin, people tend to hit the ball shorter rather than deeper. Because Novak, actually has a lot of old school traits. He hits relatively flat. He definitely has topspin, but he hits flatter and deeper, which has been around for 100 years, right? So it's interesting. But he certainly was impressive in Australia, and I knew he was probably going to win, but I lost $5 to my famous cousin by taking the field. I figured 127 out of 128, it was worth a shot.
First of all, I just want to say, Bruce, I could one day live in a world where I have no friends, but every year, and
you don't live there now.
I don't know. But every year on October 22nd, my birthday, I can count on Bruce Gullikson wishing me a happy birthday on Facebook with "Happy birthday, David. There's a party at the net." And that's what keeps me going each and every day.
I like it.
You have a very analytical side in your thinking, like, hey, how can you win? And you're already kind of digesting, hey, what's happening during these matches? Hey, are these players winning at the net? Are they winning at the baseline? You've already developed that, those details and kind of that information with, all your coaching and stuff like that.
Right.
You're one of 150. I don't know if there's a few more of the master pro titles in the world, which is which is an insane accomplishment. Super cool. How do you accomplish, getting to the highest level of being USPTA certified and getting that master level?
Well, it's a lot, and taking a lot of education and getting mentored by some really good people, and it's kind of like Dodo Cheney said about, how does she keep winning? She outlived her competition. So if you stay around long enough, they'll reward you with something. So yeah, so it's something you have to apply for, and it's various things of raising so much money for charity, contributing to the game in other ways. But yeah, it's something I'm proud of. Although I'm trying to get one of the rules changed because they're not making any exceptions for Master Pros for service rendered, because unfortunately my cousin Tom, who's done much more in the tennis world than I have, I was trying to help him with his application, but he doesn't qualify because he doesn't have all the specialty course requirements. But I'm kind of thinking they should give an exception, because as far as I know, he's the only player in the history of the world who's beaten a number one player in the world, won a Grand Slam tournament, coached an Olympic gold medalist, captained a Davis Cup winning team, been the head of player development for an entire country, as well as other things. So I think they should maybe bend that requirement, because the reason he doesn't have those courses is because he was probably teaching those courses. But that's just a little rant in case anybody from the National USPTA happens to watch this. They could maybe hear my point of view on that.
If you have a petition for that, we'll sign it.
Yeah, I'll create one. We'll see.
Well, because what you're saying there is, I think it's a classic example of, obviously Tom, maybe doesn't have some of that because he was living it out. He was teaching it.
Absolutely.
And I'm a firm believer that, oftentimes in life, the most important things that we learn aren't from a textbook. They're not from a course. They're from living it out. And I want to talk with you, Bruce, about how you grew into the game of tennis. Obviously, you've been teaching tennis, coaching tennis for a long time in a lot of different arenas. You played collegiately. You still play actively in leagues. How did tennis come into your life?
Well, it's so funny because when my cousin started doing well on the tour, my dad, who was a number one player ahead of my uncle, who was their dad in high school, he got interested in the sport again. So he started playing. So he started playing with my dad, and we'd have this little competition. First to win 100 games got a peanut butter parfait. So every game was really important. And so that, so that was kind of how I got started. And then I also learned that if you wanted to play, because my dad, bless his soul, he was a little lazy, so he'd always ask, do you want to play tennis? And I go, yeah. And then you go call up some guys and set up a doubles match. So I learned how to network early on, because if you want to play, if you ask, most people are willing, but you sit by the phone, you're probably sitting for a long time.
Yeah. Where did you grow up, Bruce?
Storby, Minnesota. So my dad was from Unalaska, Wisconsin, where my cousins grew up, but grew up in Shoreview. So went to Mounds View High School and went to Gustavus Adolphus. And, I actually wanted to be a school teacher, but I wanted to kind of be a school teacher so I could coach high school tennis. And at the time, I wasn't that bright, because if I was an elementary school teacher, I could have had any job I wanted, but I wanted to be a secondary teacher. And at that time, it was very difficult for males to get into secondary ed, and especially in the social sciences. So just happened to luck out and get a job at the Northwest clubs with Jerry Noyce, and the rest kind of fell into place from there.
Yeah. And you mentioned your cousins, Tim and Tom.
Yep.
You're referencing, and they've had, really, really illustrious, coaching careers and also playing careers.
Yes.
Did you find a lot of inspiration from them when you were kind of starting your?
Yeah, absolutely. And they were a great resource. In fact, I take 1/1 billionth of a credit for Pete Sampras's serve, because two quick Pete stories. So when my cousin Tim, who wound up coaching Pete a year before he got the job, I said, if you ever get a chance, you should try to coach this guy. We were sitting at my parents' house and they were visiting. And then I had this book on pitching by Nolan Ryan, and Tom House, who's a famous pitching coach, with the forward. And Nolan said, hey, he had great mechanics. He worked out. He had good genes. But the reason he thought he could throw fast, because he practiced throwing fast. And if you recall, well, you probably don't because you guys probably weren't born yet, but when Pete first won the US Open in 1990, he would serve really hard, but then he would blow out his shoulder. And at the time, like if you go back and look at the footage, like at one time he had a second serve at 105, but most of the second serves were like 90 or 85 or something. Again, the equipment was a little bit different, but he never served hard in practice. So if you read his autobiography, he actually didn't really like this, but Tim made him serve harder in practice, and then he developed, probably the best second serve of all time. And he never had another shoulder injury again. So take 1/1 billionth of the credit for that. So
there you go. And you also mentioned that you went to Gustavus, and both David and myself know, the long history and tradition of Gustavus, excellence. When it comes to their tennis program. So when you were going to Gustavus, were they, at that peak level when you were going there too, or did that kind of develop?
Yeah, well, I was just a scrub when I went there. If I'd have gone to another school in the MIAC, I probably would have played. But they had 3 teams at the time when I was there, and actually, when I was a freshman, they won the NCAAs. That's the last time they've done it. 1981. They had the singles champion and the doubles champion, Sean Miller from South Dakota, I believe he is from. And but they were loaded for bear. They had the North Dakota State champion, Raman Japathy. They had South Dakota State champion, Duke Pollock. They had Sean Miller. Jim Hearn was the Iowa State champion. They just were really, 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 really deep and really loaded. But and I got to know Steve Wilkinson quite well, and obviously he was a very good coach and a very smart guy. So learned some things from him too.
Yeah, and to your point about Wilk, Bruce, I've got Let Love Serve sitting on my bookshelf here. I think when you look at Gustavus Adolphus men's tennis, there's obviously the domination on the court, not only conference wide, but they're they're in the conversation every year for those that top echelon of teams in Division III men's tennis. But you could argue more importantly than that, there's a culture of not only developing a lifelong love for the game, but playing the game the right way and building relationships through it. How have you kind of implemented those things that you learned from Coach Wilkinson and just your time at Gustavus? Are those things that have stayed with you through your time as a tennis professional?
Yeah, well, I love the 3 crowns philosophy, although I got to say I was always kind of abided by that because, my dad and I would play a ton of tennis. My dad was a little fiery, so I always wanted to be like not the guy being, the attraction to. So it was more the board type than the McEnroe type, even though I love Johnny Mac's game. So, because I just, one thing I don't like in coaching is hypocrisy. So if I tell you not to throw your racket and I throw my racket, well, then I'm not being very honest to you or myself. So I would never ask a student to do something I wouldn't be willing to do myself. So, so we'll see. So far, the only time I've ever thrown my racket, David, was when I was in high school back in the Stone Age or the wood racket era. They used to have leather grips. And when I was in high school, I don't know what they call it, but I used to have really sweaty hands. And so I'd be like Tony Oliva. I'd hit a serve and the racket would go farther than the ball. And
you needed some pine tar.
Needed some pine tar. They didn't have Turner grip back then, but you'd buy 2 rackets for $15 used and bust them every season, but not on purpose. So, hopefully that record stays true because I got a 9:15 match at Baseline tonight. So we'll see.
I don't know. You were looking pretty fiery in our 9-0 mixed match the other week. I don't know. Might have to get an official out there. Calm you down.
It's that Norwegian blood, we're pretty cool under pressure.
You've name dropped, quite a few people, obviously, Steve Wilkinson, and then your cousins, Tim and Tom Gullikson. And then, so I'm kind of curious, when you're developing a coaching style, it kind of develops over time and you take parts of, this person's game, this person's game, this person's coaching style. Is there anything that sticks out to you, or any pieces of advice that you've kind of learned along the way that you still kind of hold true today and you really, really practice?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the biggest thing is you can't try to be something that you're not. So if you're not a taskmaster, you shouldn't try to, you can joke about it or whatever, but you have to just be yourself. And you also have to accept the fact that no matter how hard you work or how good a job you do, some folks just, they're not going to appreciate you, and some people that you don't think will do. So it's always surprising. Years later, you get somebody come up to you and say, "Oh yeah, I remember when you." It's like, wow, I really didn't think you would do that, but that's good, And sometimes there's things beyond your control. I remember years ago, I would do the extra mile for this one gal who played at our club, and I could never figure out. She always took lessons from another guy, and then I learned, well, that was her brother. So, there's no blood is thicker than, the job. I maybe could have done a little better job by her than her brother, but, you got to stick with your family. So there's reasons sometimes why people don't go to one coach or another. But you can learn something from everybody. The other thing they've learned is, even if you learn how not to do something, that's a valuable lesson, because it's like, oh, I wouldn't do it that way. Or sometimes you just see one drill and somebody does it from a different area of the court or different rotation, and all of a sudden you got 10 new drills out of that one thing. So just trying to be observant and respectful, because you learn something from everybody every day. So.
How has your coaching style kind of evolved? Obviously, with technology now, it's much different. And Mohamed El Houni is a great example of that, how he uses, Instagram and Facebook to, kind of portray, his different teaching style and kind of inform people. How has your style changed over the years?
Well, I'm probably not as tech savvy as Mo, that we get along well. I have Instagram, but I don't go on it too much. It's more look for but I do communicate with a lot of people via Facebook, and it's great for, for instance, knowing when David Young's birthday is going to be, or, when an event in somebody's life is going to be, and try to do the personal touch. And then also, text, learning how to communicate with people, whether it's via text or email or snail mail or face-to-face, because everybody has a different communication style. And, and I've tried to mentor Mo a little bit, because I did show him, I produced like 5 DVDs. So I sent those to him, and you could see, and try to point him in the right direction with certain people. But he's doing well up there. Although I think he's maybe doing a little too much pickleball for my taste. But nothing against pickleball, but tennis is always going to be number one.
Do you think pickleball is a threat to tennis?
Yes and no. I mean, I think personally, I think it's maybe almost reached its peak. So I don't think it's certainly not going to grow at the rate that it has been growing. And I think we can learn some things from pickleball. But I see some changes in pickleball, because I'm certified to teach that as well. And people aren't as welcoming necessarily in the pickle. It's a little more serious now, and they want to, and as the players are getting better, it's not necessarily all social, but it is easier to learn. I mean, pickleball could learn one thing from tennis. It's like change their scoring system and just alternate who serves, instead of having that 0-0-2 at the start, which is really hard to explain to people how to keep track of the score. But I was talking with Mickey Mall just a couple of weeks ago, and he was telling me they did this pretty extensive study, and it's like pickleball might be a good intro to people into tennis, because if people play pickleball first and then go to tennis, their eye-hand coordination is a little better. So maybe in lieu of, or in addition to, the red, orange, green balls for compression, if they play a little pickleball, they get a little eye hand, and you don't have super long strokes in pickleball. So it could be and the party's at the kitchen in pickleball, David. So,
Yeah, you can't go to the net. Frankly, it makes me very
unless you're
angry.
Brett Morris Carson, and then you just reach across the net.
Yeah. Bruce, you mentioned earlier, Isaac asked you about your evolution for how you've kind of adjusted your teaching. I want to talk about the evolution of the youth tennis player. Obviously, even from the early 2000s to the year 2023, the pro tour has evolved immensely. We're seeing things that we haven't seen. We're seeing new technology. But with you working with youth players and youth development, how does a player in, let's say, like the late 90s compare to today? Both on the court and playing style tendencies, but also personality and character-wise, mental toughness, things like that.
Well, this is there's similarities, but there's some differences. I do think that as technology has evolved and made some things easier to accomplish, it also has made maybe necessarily people not as mentally tough as they once were. In every sport, just because the rules tend to get made easier. Because I think the one thing, and I'm going to sound like a really old person now, which I am, but like when I was really small growing up, and I didn't start playing tennis till I was like 15, but you did a lot of things on your own, where nowadays everything is maybe too structured. And so people are too dependent on a coach or a parent or somebody to make decisions for them. So they're not really as tough mentally as they could, because it's okay to lose, and it's okay to, you have to learn things along the way. Like a lot of people want to bypass, like, how do you beat a pusher? You don't just get to jump up 3 levels and not play, because you're going to see those players all the way along the line, and it's like, if you look at the great American champions of the past, the Samprases, the Agassiz, generally they competed a little better than the guys today, so you don't want to say they're soft, but with the advent of money, become, you get a little softer, you don't expect anybody to go Ronnie Lott and cut off their thumb in the middle of a match. But on the other hand, there's an epidemic of defaults in the back draw, or I don't want to play. I played my one good UTR match, so I don't want to play that kid because their UTR isn't good. So now my stomach doesn't feel good, and that's not appropriate, because it used to be, I remember when USTA used to be actually best of 3 sets, no 10-point tiebreakers. And, so as things have gotten shortened, and sometimes it's a little bit easier to make excuses,
Well, I like what you say about that. And Isaac and I are both anti-whining.
Yes,
on the same side, we've probably both done our fair share of it. But unfortunately, that is something that you see a lot in today's game, the youth level, but even you could say at the pro level. When your cousin Tim was coaching Pete Sampras, I'm sure that those interactions were probably very different than what you see sometimes today in the box, where you see a player complaining to their box, yelling at them, screaming at them. For youth players up to the pros, what is it going to take? I'm not going to say to completely flip that 180, but to regain a sense of that mental toughness.
Well, I think a couple things could happen. So just one tip to my cousin Tim, probably the biggest thing that he taught Pete Sampras was how to compete, because Pete wasn't a great competitor when he first came on the tour, but you could argue he's one of the best competitors of all time when he retired. But he basically, the story goes, he told him, take your white collar off, put your blue collar on, and go to work, and no excuses, because like Pete didn't like grass before he started working with Tim. He was 1-3 at Wimbledon. He won 7 of the next 8 years after being, so he knew a little something about grass court tennis and, what his attributes were. And unfortunately, he passed away kind of during the peak of Pete's career, because, Paul Annacone did a good job, but perhaps Pete would have done even better had Tim never passed. You don't know, but I think a couple of things could happen. We should have more tournaments where parents aren't allowed to watch, because you want to be supportive of your kid, but sometimes it's better just let junior drop them off and pick them up in 4 hours and just let them do their thing, because they have to learn on their own. It's like like when I coach a women's team or whatever, oftentimes I'll be picking up balls because time is money, but like the the kids should really pick up the balls when they're taking a lesson or what, because I mean, they have to learn to do things on their own. So I've coached at the Billie Jean King Cup a few times out in San Diego, and like, boy, the players, they got to pick up the garbage. They got to do, she's very much about having people being independent, and the coaches don't do that stuff for the players, because I think sometimes we enable people by trying to, sometimes you're just trying to be nice, but it's like sometimes you got to let people, do things on their own, including fail, because in learning that failing isn't the worst thing. Wawrinka has this saying about fail again, and he's had a pretty nice career, but I think that's what it takes. And I also think just having better role models, again, because you look at Djokovic early in his career, he was not a great competitor. He always feigned an injury and would retire and have excuses. Now, a lot of people don't like him, but he doesn't make excuses when he plays, and he plays hard. He plays very well.
Yeah, well, I like what you're saying about that, Bruce, because like I've shared with you, I work at a sports psychology company. So we talk about failure a lot. And there's this concept of one of our providers, was working with a high-level athlete, and they told that athlete, I want you to picture yourself throwing an interception. And, the quarterback met that with like, well, what are you talking about? Like, are you the worst psychologist ever? And he said, only if you're never, ever going to throw an interception again, because even if there's the slightest chance, I want you to be prepared. And it's that concept of no matter how great an athlete you are, you're going to lose at some point. You're going to fail. You're not going to play a game at some point. And, I think in tennis and just in life in general, your true colors are shown in moments of adversity. So
there's no question about it. I mean, the thing like tennis more so than other sports, if you have 128 people in the draw, 127 are going to lose, right? So because the thing that most people don't understand about pro tennis, most pro tennis players never win a tournament in their entire career. I mean, probably 5% of all the people who play professional tennis ever win a tournament in singles, probably the same percentage in doubles. So, they fail a lot there. In fact, most of them don't have a 500 record when they retire. So
I fail a lot on your 4-5 team.
Bruce, it's all about the team, David. The team does well, right?
That's right.
Bruce, you mentioned a little bit earlier that you've made 5 DVDs kind of with your coaching style. When in those DVDs, one of them was the Bruce Gullikson 2-pack, $55 video that you can buy from Championship Productions. So in those videos, are you talking, technical advice, or do you kind of give, that life advice and, overcoming adversity in those as well?
Well, mostly they're videos for coaches to DVDs for coaches, just show them different drills and things, tips and tricks you can do with your players on the court. So what do you do if you have a ton of players and not a lot of courts, or what do you do if you have high level players and you want to get them a workout, those kind of things, and do try to give some advice along the way there. But and coaching style is interesting because always evolving as a coach every day, and I learn from my coworkers, Doug Matuska and Mike Jones and Luciano Battaglini and all kinds of people. So I learn from people I just hit with on Saturday morning doubles, like Mickey Mall's a great example. The guy was number 1 in the world in the 40 and over doubles, with Rick Leach as a partner. So if I got a question about service return, ask Mickey, because his return of serve is literally world class.
Do you get any sort of royalty from those videos? Get a little
a little bit. So every year it gets a little smaller because you haven't produced any new ones for a few years, but you get a little bit of royalty. So you're not going to get rich making the DVDs, but it was really good experience. And Championship Productions, they come out and they do all the shooting for you, and you basically write your own script, and they'll kind of go through and do it all in one day. So it's kind of a fun experience. So something you two maybe should try at the it could be get Ollie to do one. I think he's I got Ollie do some tips for the northern section after my tips kind of ran out. So although I haven't seen him do any lately. So you might need to give him a little nudge.
I think he got banned from social media.
Yeah, I'm banned.
Well, we'll say
The
this
English
to our
sense of humor, not everybody gets it.
yeah, those Brits are pretty dry, but we'll say this to our millions of subscribers.
Yeah.
Go out there, purchase Bruce's videos. Was it Champion?
Championship Productions.
Championship Productions, Bruce Gullikson. It's what you need to become the best coach that you can, the best player that you can.
Thank you very much.
And you talked a lot about, overcoming adversity, and one thing that I think I was really, really disappointed in the last few years was when the University of Minnesota, but then also the University of Iowa, when they cut the men's tennis programs at both those schools. And when you're overcoming adversity, these kids, didn't get a chance to, do that, or they're taking a chance away from someone else to be able to perform at that high of a level. What are your thoughts? Obviously it's been some time now on that situation.
Well, it's a difficult thing because obviously it really hurts because the go for men's tennis was probably as close as anybody's going to get to seeing professional tennis here, because we don't have any pro tournaments in Minnesota, North or South Dakota. Every once in a while we get an exhibition, but so that was the highest level of tennis people are going to be exposed to, and it's free and the atmosphere is good. But my personal opinion, I really think with the name, image, likeness, that in probably the not so distant future, we may not have any college sports. They may just have football and basketball, but they'll make their own money and just rent the stadiums from the universities, and the universities will maybe just say, we don't make any money off these other sports, and just either do intramurals or scrap them, unfortunately, because you kind of lose the student athlete perspective. But at least at Division I, the money is so huge in football and basketball, because even like hockey, which can generate revenue, but it's not anywhere near the revenue producer that football or basketball is. So that's where I think it's heading, because with you're looking at like how the coach who just USC or UCLA just hired, used to be at Oklahoma. They're going to get all these guys go to Hollywood and get them commercials and this and that. And it's pretty hard to compete. And I don't know if they'll need scholarships anymore, because they can get these guys set up pretty well financially if they're good. So
yeah, there's a lot of college players that have had a lot of impact on the pro level. One of my favorite players, Cam Norrie, he played at TCU, an incredible player there. But he's arguably a top 10 guy. I think he's in the top 15 right now for rankings. But if you go down the rankings of the top 100, you start to see quite a few college guys. And I hope in the future it's more. Do you think college is becoming more of a stepping stone into that that pro level, or like you said, the NIL stuff might kind of be dampening that a little bit?
Provided they keep the college tennis, I think is twofold to answer, because Norrie's great. Isner's was a great college player. I think for the players who aren't phenomenal as the wunderkind, the college is good. Ben Shelton being the latest, but obviously it's kind of good to go to college when your dad's the coach there. It's like a little incentive to play, but he's going to be professional now. But because I think it helps with the physical maturation, and they get to do some matches, and the best, a lot of them just play a lot of challengers or satellites in the off season. But I don't think you're going to see too many 4-year degree college players anymore. I mean, because it used to be years ago, if you won the NCAAs, you pretty much were assured you're going to be a top 50 player on the ATP, but that's no longer true, because a lot of times the best college players are the ones that aren't winning the NCAAs, but they only play a year, and then they maybe, because there's a lot of things that go into it. Like Norrie's great, and actually got to talk to his agent a little bit at Laver Cup, which was a great experience to go to, and his agent was part of the tour package that were in, and Cam really maximizes his game. The only problem with his game is he just doesn't have the huge firepower that some of the other guys. So, I mean, he's always going to battle. He moves well. He plays smart. He really maximizes the talent he has. But to really win a big tournament, you have to have a monster serve or an amazing forehand, or you just need to have that X factor, that one thing. And he's very, very good, so you can get to the semis or the quarters or maybe even a finals, but I just don't see him winning a slam. But yeah, he's got a lot of things to admire about his game for sure.
So Bruce, let's talk college tennis in the upper Midwest. Obviously just it sucked to see when the Gopher men's program was cut, because laymen like Isaac and I obviously never had a shot at playing for the Gophers, but so cool to go and play a baseline growing up. If you caught a tournament there where the Gophers just happened to be playing that weekend too, like what a cool opportunity to
absolutely,
this is what I could be, or this gives me motivation to work harder and just see like you can be like, see high level tennis. That being said, that's not here anymore. I think the guys playing for the Gophers in Iowa that were Northern Section guys that have gone elsewhere are Sebastian Weil, Nikita, who we mentioned earlier, and then
Jackson Allen.
Yeah. And obviously those three have relocated
to Virginia and got an NCAA championship,
which is super cool.
And that's awesome to see. How close do you follow those high level players once they do choose their college and their journeys there?
Well, it kind of depends on how close they are to here, but yeah, just getting back to your stories, if you've ever seen Wayne Bryan talk, I mean, the way Mike and Bob got into tennis is he would take them to all the Stanford Cardinal matches, and that's how they got all pumped up. So I think it is inspirational for people to see high-level tennis, and people don't realize, I mean, if you look at like the Gophers and what they have had, like Harsh Mankat, who's still in town. I mean, I remember watching Harsh play Andy Roddick in Davis Cup for India when I was in college. I mean, he was #1 ranked NCAA player in the country. Frederick Paulette, made the finals of the NCAAs as a freshman. Stefan Eriksson actually played on the Pro Tour and has the dubious distinction of being the only player in the open era to lose a match 0-0, at Wimbledon to Edberg. But the ironic thing is he'd actually beaten Edberg earlier in that year. So, but they've had some great players at the U of M. Mehdi Beniepka got up to 865 in the world. Greg Wicklund got up to top 500. Greg's very humble. He'd never tell you, but Greg was a heck of a player. So. And look at Gustavus. John, everybody thinks Eric Buderak is the greatest player in the history of Gustavus, but actually John Matke was the best player that Gustavus has ever produced. He got top 80 in the world in singles. He was very, very good.
That's pretty incredible. And, to that point, you mentioned Division I, Division III. When you're coaching, I want to ask you who's the best player you've ever coached. But before that, I want to ask you, when you're working with, let's say, like a high school player who clearly has the ability to play at the college level, you've got those clear-cut guys who are able to play high-level Division I. I just mentioned a few of them. But I'm sure you've also coached quite a few who are, could play at a lower-level Division I institution, but they could also be a standout at a Division III institution. What advice do you give to that situation and just to students you work with in general when they're navigating that process?
Well, the big thing is how much of a part of their life do they want tennis to be, and are they trying to get money for playing, or are they playing simply for the love of the game? Because when you play D1, it is kind of like a job, because you have to put in X amount of time on the, to keep your scholarship. And so it can be a bit much with the academics for some folks, and they're not really quite ready for that. Some Maya Smith Dennis, played division, just like Buderak, they both played Division I, and then they came back to Gustavus because they liked the small school better, and there wasn't as much pressure, and they didn't have to commit as much time to tennis, and they actually flourished because of that, because they had more time to do other things. So it really depends. So, but probably the best player that I've coached is a player by the name of Elliot Sprecher. He was very, very good. He won the Nike Cup when he was 14 years old, and he was a great player. He's the only junior I've ever had who asked me how to teach him how to hit a chip lob. So, I mean, he was a pretty smart kid too, you know, because it's all about the topspin lob. But, he, you know, if you can chip a lob, you can get it over a lot of great athletes because they don't see it in the juniors because nobody has that shot.
Well, I remember watching Elliot Sprecher when I was a young lad. You know, back in 12s, Elliot was probably in 16s or 18s, and you know, he was the big deal. I can remember when we all got Facebook in like 5th, 6th grade. There was a Facebook page called Elliot Sprecher is the next Roger Federer, and he turned into a Wisconsin Badger, which we love to see.
Yes. He is a Wisconsinner, true and true. He's out in San Francisco now, working for McDonald's, actually selling coffee. You know, but he's the one thing. Elliot, great serve, great forehand. You know, he wasn't naturally fast. You know, but he had a big game. I think had he concentrated on doubles, he probably could have made a little living on the pro tour. I'm not sure he was quite fast enough to play singles at that level, but he was a great kid, and he was probably the strongest tennis player I've ever coached. I mean, he could do, I think, 22 pull-ups, which is insane. You know, you could be a Marine like that. It's like, I don't know too many people who can do 20 plus pull-ups. I mean, he was country strong. He lived on the farm, you know, and he was just a strong kid.
Are there any guys or gals that you've coached throughout the years that you kind of developed or a special relationship with them and you still stay in touch with them to this day, like almost like to that next level, not just that coach player, but just kind of like almost developed into like a friendship? Or
there's lots of people, you know, some of them play on your USDA teams, and you just you know, you go from there. So you know, and then you know, being as old as I am, I have some people who I coach their kids as kids. You can see it. But yeah, so there's a lot of good players. I'm trying to think who would be, you know, and then some, you know, like I had some guys when they were real young, like Ross Greenstein was a great player and played for University of Florida. And, you know, still talk to Ross once in a while on Facebook, and he's out in California. But he was, when I was at Oak Ridge Country Club, we actually had 3 kids who wound up winning the Minnesota State high school tournament in singles. Blake Barrett, who played for Tulane, Ross went to Florida, and then Drew Zemansky also went. So, I mean, you know, so it was pretty good for a little Jewish country club to have 3 state champions come out of there. So so we had some good players at the time. But like Dean Halushko, who worked for me, he played for the Gophers, and Roger Anderson. So they're good buddies of mine, and you know, helped mentor Dean a little bit, and still stay in touch even though he's in Arizona now. But yeah, so yeah, lots of good relationships.
3 state champs out of the Jewish Country Club sounds a lot like Fargo South High School.
That's right. Because I don't know if Oak Ridge, it was more the timing than me, because I was really green at that time. But I don't know if Oak Ridge has had a state champ since then. But they had, you know, they were all similar ages, so they really pushed each other to different heights, and they were all very good kids too.
You got to go to, was it the Laver Cup that you went to this year?
Laver Cup, yep. Got to see Rogers last match. So it was awesome. So yeah, a friend of mine, Bart Cozen, who you may have seen in the Australian Open, because he goes to every slam, so he looks like Bjorn Borg. So I was, you know, kind of dressed like Johnny Mack, and we had a great time there, great seats, and it was a fantastic time. Great tournament too, because Team World won for a change. You know, they had gotten beat 14-1 the year before and gotten flummoxed. But you know, so Laver Cup, the only disappointing thing about Laver Cup was that you know, Felix looked like maybe he was going to take that next jump, and I had him in my Australian Open pool, and he went down in flames. But because he took Novak to town, and Laver Cup served him off the court. So that's, you know, the 2 ways you can beat Novak is you either got to serve him off the court, or you got to somehow figure out to get to the net against him on a big ball, because you're not going to beat him from the back of the court.
Or you cut all the strings out of his racket.
Yeah. Or you just get him banned from the country so he can't play. Right?
Yep, that's another one.
Right now in tennis, we're kind of we're reaching, and we kind of have reached a point of a little bit of contention with where is tennis going. And I'm curious on kind of what you think. Djokovic in a few years, maybe done playing. Rafa might be nearing the end of his career.
Yep.
Obviously, Roger is now retired. Where do you see tennis going with some of these newer guys, and maybe not the level that it once was?
Well, I think there's some really good, exciting players coming up. Korda and Shelton, two good young Americans. And tennis is such a worldwide sport. I mean, saying this selfishly, but it would really be good for tennis if America could produce a male Grand Slam champion, because we've done well in the women's game with the Williams sisters and various other players over the years, but we haven't done anything in the guys game since Andy Roddick. And it would just, because there's a lot of money in the States and a lot of exposure and get the popularity. I think I was playing poker a couple of weeks ago with Greg Lappin and some of the older teaching pros, and Greg was telling me that Djokovic has got like $30 million raised now for the player union, and so it's very likely that tennis may have a separate tour like the Live Tour in golf, because Larry Ellison is talking about possibly sponsoring another tour, because the unfortunate thing in pro tennis is that very few players can afford to try to make it, because if you're not in the top 50 in singles or probably top 20 in doubles, you're really struggling to get by. It's different than golf, where if you make the cut a couple of times, you're probably make a couple $100,000 for the year and you're doing well, where the number 100 singles players, restringing one string in their racket because they can't afford new strings. So there's too much disparity, because I think Greg told me, I believe, between the 4 slams and Indian Wells, that's 40% of all the prize money for the entire year on the tennis tour. So it gets, they need to spread the wealth out a little bit more so more people could, because one advantage that Novak and Rafa and Roger had when he was, if you can have your own massage therapist, your hyperbolic chamber of, semis filled with your kitchen on each continent of the globe, and a driver to run you around places, a coach, a physio. It's like they have a lot more support staff, and, it's just a much greater chance of success than when you're out there by yourself with no no coach, no trainer, no physio, no chiro. It's very difficult.
Yeah. And yeah, that's definitely like a big concern for me, watching tennis and being a huge tennis fan, is, hey, where's this sport going? And it seems like there's a lot of red tape and, different things that are preventing it from growing.
Yeah. I believe, there's a lots of red tape, and I think one thing would, like the Davis Cup, I think was a utter disaster. They need to change that format back, or at least if they're going to keep it the way they have it, they need to have the doubles be the second match, because it's stupid to have doubles third, because teams that are good in doubles, like the Netherlands, never got to play a doubles match because they're out playing the singles first, and they can tweak some things, but I kind of can you hold on 1 second?
Yeah.
Sorry, I got a phone call.
Hammer time.
USDA captaining never goes.
Never off the clock.
Never off the clock. Had to struggle to get a sub for somebody who was injured tonight. So but we're all good now. So you guys are too young, or you'd have been next on the speed dial.
There you go.
So Bruce, to Isaac's point, like we're talking about, the future of the game of tennis.
Yep.
Let's zero in on the men's side in the United States of America. First year, I believe, since the early 2000s, where we had 3 American men in the quarterfinals of the Aussie Open. You had Shelton, you had Tommy Paul, and you had No, it was his dad played Corda.
Gordon.
Yeah, Sebastian Corda. You know, do you think that crew? I mean, you can throw Tiafo in there too. Do you think
Taylor Fritz,
Yeah,
so I
and
mean, we
yeah,
have a
Taylor
good.
Fritz. Which one of those guys do you think has the potential to? I don't think we're going to see another dominant American like we had
Right.
with Sampras, with Agassi,
Right.
with
Yep.
Roddick. Will one of those guys win a Grand Slam?
I think Corda will win a slam. Shelton will always be a contender with a big serve like that, although I'd like to see him stand a little closer to the baseline. I think he's a little too far back for
Yeah, he's back at the wall.
Yep. And Taylor Fritz had a good year last year. He had Roth on the ropes at Wimbledon, and he won Indian Wells, but the Canadians also are doing well because Felix, they won the Davis Cup, and Felix and Shapovalov, so they got some good young players too. But I think Corda definitely could win a slam.
Yeah. I'm kind of curious, switch it up a little bit, but
yeah.
I've heard a rumor that you're a fanny pack guy. Is that true?
I don't know where that ever came from. Mark Stingley likes to try to get my goat sometime, but hey, if I can make a fashion statement, I'll make a fashion statement because Mark always likes to debate things. So even though he's usually wrong, but yeah, I don't.
Well,
but if they want to get my style, I can't even match my socks, so I don't know where I got the fanny pack thing. But
I would say, Bruce, that you're a champion of fashion for men. I was just having a conversation with a former teammate of mine this weekend about there are things that are not normalized for men, such as a satchel or a fanny pack or a purse that can be
European carry-all. Yeah.
We've got our wallets. A wallet is great for a card, for cash, perhaps even some coins.
Yeah.
But let's say you need an ice scraper. Let's say you get a large coupon. You go to a fine Italian restaurant and you get a to-go menu. You can't fit that in a wallet, and that's a problem.
Although you've never seen my wallet, it's kind of like the George Costanza wallet. I always have stuff, everything in there. So I think I have a bad back because it's a little lopsided. So yeah.
And Bruce, I kind of want to leave it at this. I mean, you've done so much throughout your career. You've made DVDs. You've coached a super long, illustrious career. You've connected with some great individuals throughout your playing career as well. What's next for you? What's kind of on the horizon? You have anything planned?
Yeah, well, eventually I'd kind of like to write a book, and book for instructors and entry-level pros, but so we'll just put it to this. So I'm putting it out there, so you guys have to come back in 2 years and make sure that I've finished it, because now I've thrown it out there, so I don't have to do it. Maybe get you guys doing the blog, or that idea I told you about, the case for, because I think that would be pretty cool too. But in fact, I just saw an interesting thing about I don't know if you saw this about the case for Rosewall. Did you see that? So Rosewall, I think, was denied playing Grand Slam, like 45 Grand Slams in his career, and he won 8 slams. And he lost in the finals of the U.S. Open and Wimbledon at the age of 39. But if at professional tennis back then, and the pros were better than the amateurs, he won 15, what would be the equivalent of slams in the pros. So he actually had 23 slams if you count that, and they only played 3 a year when he played professional tennis, as opposed to 4. So, you can always make a case for lots of things, because the one thing I think they always need to specify when they're talking about GOATs, they should always specify best singles player, because if you say best player, then you got to throw Johnny Mack and some other people in the mix too, because he was, in my opinion, the best doubles player that ever lived. And Martina Navratilova doesn't get any love, and she was definitely a better doubles player than Serena. We'll put it at that.
If you were to say there's one GOAT, who would you say is the GOAT, male or female?
That's really a tough question. It's all surface related, I think, because I think for one match on a medium paced hard court, I'd go with Sampras, but on a clay court, go with Rafa. But Novak is very tough on any court, and Roger's supremely talented. And, but I never saw Pancho Gonzalez or some of these other guys play. So it's difficult because you got to talk about mental toughness, Davis. They didn't have chairs on the court back when those guys played, Then
Right.
they're playing best of 5 sets with no tiebreakers and they didn't get to sit down. So it's a little tougher.
Reminds me of the old Jimmy Connors quotes. Something about the U.S. Open. They appreciate you. They want you to spill your guts out. If you spill your guts out at Wimbledon, they'll make you clean it up.
There you go. That's probably true. I hadn't heard that one. So.
Bruce, I want to let you know, if you need some help with that book, with some ghostwriting, I was a journalism major.
Well, that's good to know. It's always good to network. That's one great thing about tennis is you get to meet a lot of great people like you guys and get to network and know some things and know some other skills and attributes that people have other than their forehands and backhands. So how did it go with your brother for the Viking, by the way? And is he coming back next year?
I hope so. I hope he gets signed to a futures contract here. He just moved out to Raleigh, North Carolina. Him and his now fiance are out there. She's working for the Carolina Hurricanes, so he's gonna keep on working. Hopefully get another shot here. So
nice.
Yeah. But Bruce, thank you so much for coming on. It's great hearing about
asking.
Yeah, it's great hearing about all the stuff you're doing and your story, and obviously there's probably so much more that you can talk about. And when you write that book, we'll be sure to have you on again. So thank you.
All right, that sounds good. That's motivation. Thanks so much, guys. Keep up the good work.